so glad to be teaching through the Bible as we continue through Numbers. We started last video with those first few chapters on the census, and now we're moving on to chapters 5 through 7, at least get through 5 and 6 today, and we're going to look primarily at a couple things here with a test for adultery and the Nazirite vow, followed by Aaron's blessing. And these here may seem kind of random. It may seem like what is going on with one and then the other and the other. We had a census right before this, and then what we have after this. How does this all fit in the book of Numbers? So starting off in chapter 5, we have this test for adultery. And with this test for adultery, what's going on here? Well, so a husband says, I think my wife is cheating on me. That's basically what starts this. And when that happens, he has a process to go through to see if that's true, to verify that. They have to go before the priest near the tabernacle. They're over there doing a certain process, a certain ritual, where the priest has this cup, takes this cup, then with the cup, he takes some dirt, puts that in there, a little bit of dust. Specifically, this dust is from the tabernacle area. And then he takes a piece of paper, writes on it these curses, and then, because it's parchment, because you are able to wash that writing off, actually, takes that, washes it off into the cup as well. The woman has to agree to this oath and then drinks the water. And then, essentially, you're either going to have one of two things happen. If she is guilty, then certain things happen to her body that cause her not to be able to have kids anymore. You see the word here where it says the thigh. If we look in chapter 5, verse 22, may this water that brings the curse pass into your bowels and make your womb swell and your thigh fall away. Now, in the Bible, there are a few times at least where the thigh, we've seen this already in Genesis, they're not really talking about the thigh. It's around that location. They're talking about something near the thigh, if you catch what I'm saying. That's just kind of a more, we'll say, polite way of saying that, instead of actually saying that part of the body. So when it says the thigh fall away, when it says make your womb swell, these are both talking about reproductive organs, about that not working anymore. She's not going to be able to have kids anymore. But I've talked in previous videos about this. This is a huge deal. This is a terrible curse for her to not be able to have kids anymore. So that is if she is guilty. And if she's not guilty, then in fact, nothing happens, and she is vindicated. She is proven to actually have been faithful, and so justice is brought about that she gets nothing wrong happen to her. So in this, there's this test to see if she's faithful, and if she's not, then those results happen. This is talking about the womb. This is talking about the bodily organs. This is not talking about, there's one translation that chooses for no real reason to talk about this as if there was already a baby inside and the baby is dying and that's what's going on. That is not supported in the text. That's not in the Hebrew there. So if you happen to have that one translation, at least there's only one that I know of that translates it that way, that's off. That's not what this is saying. This is just talking about, like it says, the womb. It's talking about those reproductive organs not working anymore. And so those aren't going to work anymore. That's what the curse is. And there's a couple things we can take away from this initially that, first of all, this does not indicate the jealousy of the husband is bad. It talks about him being jealous, and this is why he's got this process going on, why he's brought her and an offering to the priest, because he is wanting to make sure she's not cheating on him because he thinks she's being unfaithful and he's jealous. It's not presented as a bad thing for him to be jealous. of his wife. And we see in the New Testament, Paul talks about how the husband and the wife, they are not independent of one another. The husband, it says, owns the wife, and the wife owns the husband. It's reciprocal. Okay, that's important to know as well, that Paul talks about. It's not a one-way thing. This is a reciprocal thing, and they belong to each other. And so it is okay for him to be jealous of her potentially being with someone else because she belongs to him. And it'll make more sense as we see the parallel here, what this is pointing us to. But it is also fine for her to be jealous for him, for like he belongs to her. As I said, we see that in the New Testament, clarifying that. So jealousy in and of itself isn't bad. And so we've actually seen, we see in the Bible that God is jealous sometimes, and that's not a bad thing. Certainly if God is jealous, then how is that a bad thing when he is an all-good God? So jealousy is not bad. It's when you're jealous of something that doesn't belong to you. That's the problem. And in most cases, not just throughout the Bible, but in the world, that's what's going on. You're jealous, you want something that's not really properly something you ought to be jealous of because it's not really yours. And so here, though, we see jealousy just used in a light that's not actually a bad thing, like not a sinful thing. We also see that when the husband is jealous, what is he to do? He's going to the priest, and the priest is doing this ritual where God is the one determining. God is the one that's declaring it, because there's nothing magical in the water. The water itself doesn't just I put the dust in here and so now magic, right? This is a ritual that they're doing, but God is the one that at the end of the day is either causing her to be unable to reproduce or allowing her to continue. And we've seen this throughout, especially Genesis, but throughout all of the Bible up to now, that God is in control of that. And it's very clear that God's in control of that. He closes up the womb and he opens it up in a number of cases. He's the one in control of that. So this is not some hocus pocus sort of thing. God is the one that is determining this. And so the husband isn't deciding this on his own. He's going to God's spokesman, as it were, and God is the one who is declaring her innocence or guilt. So then, aside from those things, these details that we have here, what's the big picture here? What's going on as far as this whole narrative? Why is it here? Why do we have, seemingly arbitrarily, this show up? Well, let's look at the context and what happened right before this. So we had the census. Then we had another census that was specifically the Levites, and then talking about the work they were to do. And what is their work? Well, part of it is separating, right? This is holy, this is not holy. And then we see chapter 5 start with reminding them that if there's anyone who's unclean, they need to be outside of the camp. So the Levites have to be this barrier. There's the tabernacle, then there's the Levites, who are essentially a barrier to the rest of Israel, and then there's those who are unclean that are outside of even that camp. And so this is reminding them of that. And then it goes on to talk about when people are, chapter 5, verse 6, speak to the people of Israel, when a man or woman commits any of the sins that people commit by breaking faith with Yahweh, and that person realizes guilt, he shall confess the sin that he has committed. So talking about breaking faith with Yahweh. Well, then what happens right after that is that's where we get the test for adultery. And it uses the same root word for breaking faith. So verse 12, speak to the people of Israel, if any man's wife goes astray and breaks faith with him. So these are kind of parallel in some ways. And so what you're seeing is it's talking about ultimately being faithful to God, to the promise you've given to God. You've made this covenant with God. The Israelites have made a covenant with God, and they need to remain faithful to that. And so here we see it's kind of a human analogy that's giving them a picture of needing to be faithful to God. But of course they're not. And this is actually even a foreshadowing of a large chunk of what's coming next. So we have that outline here. The first generation fails. That is chapters 11 through 25. That's a large chunk of this book of Numbers. And so this is actually giving us a foreshadowing of what's coming. God's people will be tested and they will be found guilty of being unfaithful. And so this early on in Numbers lets us know what's coming later in Numbers. But it's also talking about how they need to be faithful to God. And we know they're not going to be, and we know we're not. And so that's a problem because we deserve the curse. We deserve the judgment. There could be blessing. She could drink the water. This person that's been accused, she could drink the water. Nothing happens. That vindicates her, gives the blessing of showing her faithfulness. The water in itself doesn't bring the curse. It can go blessing or curse. But in this case, we know there should be curse because we know Israel is going to be unfaithful. We're going to see that. So how is it that they can get the blessing? Because we see that Aaron's blessing comes at the end of chapter 6. It says in chapter 6, verse 23, "Speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, thus you shall bless the people of Israel. You shall say to them, Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. So shall they put my name upon the people of Israel, and I will bless them." So how do they get this blessing? We just saw that there's God saying they need to be faithful, and then giving this human analogy, and we know that it's going to come out with them being unfaithful. They're going to be tested, and over and over again, they're going to be unfaithful. And yet, God's talking about this blessing, that there's this blessing he gives to them. Well, what's in between those two parts? In between those two, sandwiched right in there, is the Nazirite vow. And we see a Nazirite. He's got three basic things that he has to follow, which is no wine, and depending on how you understand this, perhaps no alcohol of any kind, but certainly no wine, grapes, even the skins of grapes, none of that. He can't have any of that. He can't be near a dead person, even if that person just drops dead randomly right next to him. He has to give a sin offering, and he has to start the process all over, and then he can't ever cut his hair. Now, with the Nazirite vow, it is only a limited amount of time. He's typically only got a designated amount of time, like I'm going to do this for a year. I'm going to do this for 5 years. I'm going to do this whatever the time is. And in fact, I say he, but could be a woman as well. There's no restriction on women. With the priesthood, obviously, only men. But with the Nazirite vow, men or women can take this vow. This is considered a special vow. This is kind of a really amazing vow that is very difficult to follow through with, and so you have to, it's a high standard. It's a very high bar. So this vow, though, you have someone who is dedicating themselves for this time to Yahweh. Now, we actually have a couple of examples of Samson. Later on, he was a Nazirite for life. It seems like maybe Samuel was as well. There's some indication of that. It doesn't spell that out, but it does give an indication that's possibly what it's referring to at the beginning of the book of 1 Samuel. And then perhaps John, the baptizer in the New Testament. He may also have been a Nazirite for life. There's some indication there, but again, it's not spelled out exactly. So it could be a lifelong pledge, but typically it was not. It was a designated amount of time. But this person, they are dedicated to Yahweh for service to him, not priestly service. This is not a priest who's necessarily doing this. But that's why the hair has to be cut off and shaved after if they're restarting the process after being around a dead body, because then the hair is defiled in a sense. It's ritually defiled. And when the process does complete, when this person finishes their time, they bring a sacrifice. Their hair is part of the sacrifice. They cut off their hair and throw that in with the animal sacrifice to be burned up as a dedication to Yahweh. And so, as amazing as that is, though, this really points to something even greater, because Jesus, he was not a Nazirite while on earth, but he was someone, not just his hair was dedicated, but his whole body and his whole life dedicated to Yahweh. And he completed that perfectly. His dedication, his holiness, that is how his people get the blessing. And so while he wasn't a Nazirite, and that word is not related to the name Nazareth, to anything that I can see. This is a word. Nazirite comes from the Hebrew word for separation, so this isn't related to him coming from Nazareth, but that would be him being a Nazarene, not a Nazirite. And so here we've got this problem of God's people have to be faithful to him, but they're going to be tested. They're going to be found unfaithful. So how do they get to the blessing? It's through Jesus, through his faithfulness, through what we see pointed to in this Nazirite vow. And so this Nazirite vow should remind us of him and lets us know a bit about how we're going to get from the unfaithfulness to the blessing. It's only through him. And so that's how we have this all connected. That's how this chapter 5, chapter 6, it all flows together. It all makes sense, as this is a gospel message that we see in the book of Numbers. And it all starts with talking about these priests that we just read about in the census. Their job is separating. Their job is keeping the holy and the unclean separate. So that's where we're going to wrap up today. This section, chapters 5 and 6, how we see how this all fits together, how it's a cohesive unit, following from the census to this, ending with the Aaronic blessing. And after Aaron's blessing, we're going to move into chapters 7 through 10 next time to see what we can learn from some stuff that may, at first glance, seem really bland, repetitive, boring, but actually has a lot in there. And we're going to be able to learn a lot from that next time. Thank you for watching that video. I hope that it helped you learn a little bit more about the Bible today. And if you'd like to continue to learn more about the Bible, then we have plenty of other videos on the channel. And if this has been helpful for you, then you can always let me know by subscribing to the channel. And hopefully I'll be able to continue to help you learn even more about God's Word. Thanks.